Fellas, we've just had Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury, and Francis Ngannou arguably just beat the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, and Francis Ngannou has never had a boxing match in his life. This really poses the question, why is boxing so bad compared to MMA? Now, there's multiple reasons you can go for. I've got a couple reasons in the video. I've got around 5 reasons. Let me know if I missed any out, and let me know if you agree. But there's got to be some reasons why is boxing terrible compared to MMA, because boxing's been around a lot longer. It used to be so good, but nowadays MMA is superior to boxing, and it's not even close. So we're going to be going over a few reasons. Let me know if you agree with these reasons, but the first reason is that, first of all, we rarely get to see big fights in boxing. I will admit, 2023 has been a good year for boxing. We've got to see Spence versus Crawford, Canelo, Charlo, Garcia versus Tank. But let's be honest, in a standard boxing year, how many mega fights do we get to see? 2 or 3 a year? Like 2023, like I said, it's been alright for boxing, but when do we ever see these mega fights in boxing? In MMA, there's literally about 3 to 4 mega fights in the space of like a few months. Like, sometimes they've got 2 mega fights on the same card. Like, for example, earlier this year, between the months, when was it, like March to April, we had Jones versus Garn, we had Volk versus Islam. Well, first of all, Jones versus Garn, it was the greatest of all time, John Jones, returning against the new generation heavyweight of Cyril Garn, the big comeback. Then we had the best versus the best, undefeated in the UFC, Volk versus undefeated in, no, actually not undefeated in the UFC, got knocked out, but the best lightweight at the time, Islam. And then we've got Adesanya versus Pereira in their rematch, and that was only with this, I can't speak, what's going on? That was only in the space of about 3 months. What I'm saying is there's so many more mega fights in MMA. We always get to see the bigger fights in MMA, and in boxing, you're lucky to see a big fight like once a year, twice a year. Like I said, 2023, I'll give it to boxing. They've had some good fights so far. But in a standard boxing year, like, how many times do we see these big fights? It's very rare. And in MMA, like I said, sometimes we're seeing 2 big fights on the same card. We almost just saw John Jones versus Miocic and Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prohaska on the same card. So when it comes to big fights, if you want to find where the big fights are, MMA 100%, pretty much a big fight on every single pay-per-view. And you actually get, I mean, listen, I will admit, MMA pay-per-views are overpriced, but at least you're getting something with them. You're getting a lot of fights, whereas in boxing, the pay-per-views are terrible. I feel that's a completely different point, but that's my first point. We rarely get to see big fights in boxing. The next one, boxing isn't the best versus the best, and it's all a money grab. MMA, there's a lot of discussion saying, oh, you shouldn't pay for MMA pay-per-views, it's overpriced. But like I said, you're getting some decent fights when it comes to MMA. In boxing, you should never buy a pay-per-view. I don't care. It's such a big money grab. Fury versus Chisora, you're paying for that. Derek Chisora versus Fury free. Fury's beat him twice, and it's an old Chisora who shouldn't be in there, never mind with the heavyweight champion of the world. Fury versus Ngannou. Francis Ngannou just arguably beat Tyson Fury, and Francis Ngannou has never had a boxing match in his life. Joshua versus Helenius. Helenius, who even is he? I swear he's like a bodybuilder who became a boxer, got knocked out by Wilder, and then got knocked out by Joshua. And these are the classed as big fights in boxing, and you shouldn't pay for these pay-per-views. And then in MMA, we've got all the big fights, the best versus the best. We've got the pound-for-pound #1 versus the pound-for-pound #2, Volk and Islam. Even Aspinall versus Pavlovich, which is in a couple of weeks from now. Those are the 2 best heavyweights right now, excluding, I guess, Jones, taking on each other. Oliveira versus Islam last year as well. That fight was so hype. We had an upcoming contender in Islam versus Oliveira, who was destroying all the rest of the competition. In MMA, it is always the best versus the best. We're always seeing all these big fights. We don't get to see one of the best fighters take on like that. Imagine in MMA, we saw John Jones versus like Marcin Tybura. You know what I'm saying? Or we saw like Alex Pereira versus Parker Porter. Do you know what I'm saying? Like in MMA, we get to see the best versus the best, whereas in boxing, it's never the best versus the best. It's usually just the top fighters fighting these easy fights. And let's be honest, there's so much padded records in boxing. There are a few padded records in MMA as well, but in boxing, so many of the top guys have padded records. But yeah, it's all a money grab in boxing. MMA, you can say it's overpriced, but at least you're getting something good with it. Whereas in boxing, it's just a money grab, and it's not the best versus the best like MMA is. The next point is that the production for UFC is so much better. I was just watching that Fury and Ngannou card. The difference between the time space between the main event and the co-main event, I believe it was 2 hours. 2 hours between the main and co-main event. In MMA, maximum 30 minutes. Like, maximum. In MMA, the longest you'll have to wait is 30 minutes. Longest. Maybe you'll have to wait, like, in an average MMA card, I mean, UFC 294 just took place. We had to wait, like, what, 15 minutes from the co-main event to the main event? In boxing, they've got all these celebrities. And by the way, boxing pays celebrities to show up. When they're taking place in Saudi Arabia, don't think the celebrities are willingly showing up. The reason there's so many celebrities there is because Saudi Arabia is paying the celebrities to go there. That's why. There's all these performances from mumble rappers that nobody asked for. The rapping's not even that good, let's be honest. The rapping's terrible. The rapping's terrible. It's all mumble rappers. I don't think I can recall a single lyric or song that was played. It's just to kill time. How is influencer boxing getting 1.4 million pay-per-views? The fact that influencers who have never fought before, or maybe not never fought before, but have had a handful of fights, are taking over boxing, just shows you the levels that boxing's at. And like I said, the difference, 50 minutes in between, and it wasn't even 50 minutes, it was like 2 hours in between the main and the co-main event. In MMA, there's much less messing around. You don't have these terrible performances. There's never these massive delays before a fight. In the pullouts as well. We literally just had Oliveira pull out and Volkanovski pull in. Paulo Costa pull out. Kamaru Usman pull in. Maybe not pull in, maybe a different word, but you get what I'm saying. We have good pullouts, whereas in boxing, if a fighter was to drop out, the card's getting shut down. The card's getting scrapped. The only time I remember a card getting scrapped is when John Jones refused to fight another opponent in a short notice fight, but that's because John Jones always does that. And it's just fights. We don't have all this performance nonsense. It's just fighting the UFC, and that's what makes it so much better. The next point, the UFC fighters have so much better personalities, and I also want to say on top of that, 80% of boxing fans are casuals, and I say that because you ask a guy, like people that say that boxing's better than MMA, 80% of them don't even watch boxing. Then 80% of them are casuals. They'll watch a massive fight. They'll watch a quote-unquote big fight. They probably couldn't name 10 active boxers, to be honest with you. They can only name Ryan Garcia, Tyson Fury, Canelo. There's much less casuals in MMA than there is boxing. And like I said, going back to the personality, who does boxing genuinely have as a big personality? Like, what, a retired Mayweather, Tyson Fury? Who is the big personality in boxing? And I want to go back to influencer boxing because it feels like influencer boxing is where all the personality's from. In MMA, we have McGregor, obviously that's the obvious one, Sean Strickland, the middleweight champion, Colby fighting for the belt, Oliveira fighting for the belt, and the list goes on. There's so much personalities. Nearly all the top fighters have as well. Nearly every single one of the top fighters have this personality about them. So personality-wise, MMA is much better. And I say excluding Jones, McGregor, and Islam pay-per-views because those three are kind of casual. They attract the casual audience. Maybe Adesanya as well. But most MMA fans are actually fans of the sport. Whereas, like I said, a lot of these boxing fans aren't even fans and they're just tuning to the big fights. You ask an average quote-unquote boxing fan to name more than 10 active fighters, they probably couldn't. Whereas I feel like, of course there's casuals in MMA, but you take away the Jones, McGregor, Islam and Adesanya fans, and they're genuinely just fans of MMA. So there's much less casuals in the MMA scene, and the personalities are just so much better. Boxing press conferences are unbearable. It's so boring. The build-up to boxing fights. There was a good trailer for Fury and Ngannou, but boxing build-ups are so boring compared to MMA. Like the press conferences, they don't even do good promotion. We have the vlog series and everything on MMA. It's just so much better. And the final point is that boxing cards are dead. The MMA prelims, I'd rather watch the MMA prelims or the UFC prelims for a pay-per-view than I would an entire boxing card. Every boxing card is all just centered around the main event. They don't care about the co-main event. I don't even know who fought on the co-main event of the Fury and Ngannou card. I don't think I remember a single co-main event in any boxing card, to be honest with you. Whereas in MMA, you could have the biggest main event ever, and the pay-per-view would still be considered bad without a stacked card. In the UFC, at least, you have to absolutely stack the card in nearly every pay-per-view. The main card has to be good. Even the prelims have to be good. The only exception is if, like I said, a big fight's taking place. So if McGregor's on the main event, or maybe John Jones is on the main event, that's when they probably won't stack the cards because they know it's going to bring numbers in. But even then, we had Jones fighting and we've got Alex Pereira on the co-main event. Boxing, they don't care about the undercard. They absolutely don't care about the undercard. It's all just centered around the main event. They do no promotion for the undercard or any other fight on the card. It's literally all just main event boxing. And in MMA, or at least the UFC, the card is the entire card. It's not just the one fight in the main event. It's the entire card that's highlighted. So these are just a couple of reasons, and I know it says 4 twice, just ignore that. But these are just a couple of reasons why boxing is so bad compared to MMA. Let me know if I missed any points out, but MMA is so superior to boxing. And thank you for watching.